right, welcome back to Fundamentals of Philosophy. This is part one of our lecture on Module 4 regarding the metaphysics of mind. As always, please consult the handout that accompanies these lectures for greater detail regarding terminology and the specific steps of philosophical arguments. So, this module is about technologies, music, and ghosts. In Module 1, we saw how philosophy excavates the conceptual scaffolding underlying our ordinary beliefs. In Module 2, we saw how deductive and inductive logic serve as inferential engines to analyze the scaffolding's soundness and validity. We've seen, in other words, how philosophy transforms concepts into algorithms for analyzing truth. In Module 3, we applied these tools to epistemology, the study of knowledge. Module 4 is the first of two modules to apply this machinery of analysis to metaphysics, the study of the nature of reality itself. Specifically, we will be looking in this module at the ontology of the mind. Where epistemology studies what we know, ontology studies what exists. So in part one of this lecture, we're going to begin once more in the Cartesian theater and ask, given what we've learned about the nature of knowledge in the last module, what follows regarding the nature of the mind? So Descartes reconceptualized the mind as a sort of internal haunting, a spectral inner theater filled with ghostly mental events. And what the internal spectator observes is not the world itself, but only representations that correspond to objects in the world. The res cogitans, the thinking subject, is ontologically severed from the res extensa, the physical world. The result is that our internal beliefs about the world can never actually be justified by external facts about the world. But this substance dualism doesn't just lose true knowledge. The division of the world into two fundamentally distinct substances creates another, larger puzzle. How can something with no location, mass, or volume cause anything to happen in a physical world defined by those properties? Every potential point of leverage in the body and world is stripped away from the immaterial Cartesian mind. Mind and matter share nothing in common. They overlap nowhere. They are ontologically sealed off from one another. Regardless of how it seems from inside the theater, your thoughts cannot, by definition, have any effect on the actions performed by your body. Now, Princess Elizabeth of Bohemia was the first to point this problem out in personal correspondences with Descartes. It has since become known as the interaction problem or the mind-body problem. There doesn't seem to be any way to explain how an immaterial substance can exert causal force on a material world. When this chain of logic unfolds to its natural conclusion, we are left with something known as epiphenomenalism. Now, Paul Churchland discusses this in our readings. An epiphenomenon is something that is a byproduct of something else, right? Thomas Huxley used the example of a steam whistle on a locomotive. The steam is what powers the train, and the whistle is the secondary byproduct. It accompanies the operation of the train, but it doesn't do any of the actual work of making the train move, right? So the Cartesian mind in its private theater seems like a similar sort of epiphenomenon. It accompanies the operation of the brain and the body, but it can't do any of the actual work. It's always a spectator and never an actor. The firing of neurons and the public behavior of bodies is where all of the causal action happens. The mind, meanwhile, just sort of hovers about, the ceremonial administrator, no actual power or authority, just along for the ride, unable to causally interact with the world of bodies and brains. So this ghost of epiphenomenalism has haunted philosophy for around 400 years now. Dualism, in one form or another, has remained one of the most prominent theories of consciousness. It is the default view of many religions, and has become so deeply embedded in our language and culture that it is difficult to speak about the mind without implicitly falling into dualistic assumptions. Dualism has achieved the status of what Churchland calls folk psychology. It constitutes our ordinary, common sense view of the mind. And yet the story it tells seems to remove any possible agency from the mind. But dualism isn't the only framework that's available for understanding the relationship between the mind and the world. The most common alternative is some form of what's called monism. Dualism, monism, where dualists see a world divided into two distinct but ontologically equal categories of being. Monists argue that everything that exists is fundamentally grounded in one substance. Typically, this involves some process of reduction, right? Where one of Descartes' two categories is shown to be explicable entirely in terms of the other. Among contemporary philosophers and neuroscientists, the dominant view by far is that the mental can be explained entirely in terms of the physical. Broadly, views of this type are known as forms of physicalism. So physicalists believe that the world revealed to us through scientific investigation is the only world that exists. Mental language, when it refers to anything at all, refers to the sorts of physical processes described by science. While there is broad consensus on this point, there is considerable disagreement about regarding how the reduction of mind to matter actually works. So Descartes' substance dualism remained what Gilbert Ryle calls the official doctrine that was generally accepted until the mid-20th century or so. The problem, according to Ryle, is that Descartes' position, when looked at critically, actually represents a particular case of a general logical fallacy known as a category mistake. We commit a category mistake when we take terms that are appropriate in one context and apply them within a different context in which they are inappropriate. This creates the illusion of deep philosophical puzzles, where there is in fact only a misuse of ordinary language. So in Ryle's view, when we ask what sort of thing a mind is, we're committing a category mistake. The Cartesian view tells us that we live a strange sort of double life, right? There is the normal, publicly observable life that we live as bodies interacting with one another in the physical world. But each of us is a second, secret mental life, characterized by what's known as privileged access. The life of the mind is accessible only to the person living it. Each mind exists as an isolated universe of sensation and imagination, a private haunting that we navigate in fundamental solitude. We know our own minds intimately. We can know other minds not at all. We are all alone together. Ryle describes this position as the doctrine of the ghost in the machine. We imagine the public life of the body as the actions of a machine that is being operated by an unseen immaterial something that exists nowhere in space or time, is invisible to all other observers, and can be measured by no scientific instruments. This, to Ryle, is utter nonsense, and an indication that an error of reasoning is occurring, is being committed somewhere. It's easier to accept Ryle's diagnosis, by the way, of the problem than it is to accept his conclusion, his solution. Ryle's alternative to dualism is a position known as logical behaviorism. So when we speak of mental events, what we're actually referring to is dispositions or tendencies to act in certain ways under certain circumstances, right? So we see an apple and we say, this is red, assuming it's a red apple. We are physical bodies. We hear a guitar riff and we nod our heads, right? We are physical bodies that tend to behave in certain publicly observable ways. And there is nothing further that needs to be said about the matter. That's it. That's all there is to it. It's just behavior. Now, this conclusion seems sort of insufficient to most contemporary philosophers. Exercising the ghost from the Cartesian theater doesn't mean that all we're left with is a description of the ways that people observe one another behaving, right? 3/4 of a century past Ryle, which is where we're at now, we have an impressive understanding of the gears underneath the hood of Ryle's machine. We have fMRIs, functional magnetic resonance imaging machines, that can produce detailed images of the inner workings of the brain. And we can literally watch patterns of neurons firing, lighting up when mental events occur. We can watch it happen in real time. We can tell a much more detailed story than a simple appeal to behavioral outputs. When a subject looks at a red apple, we can describe in pretty stunning detail how light waves, oscillating at 620 to 750 nanometers, cause the V4 region of the visual cortex to activate in a consistent fashion. Maybe, as Paul Churchland argues, this description is all that needs to be said about mental states. When we say, I see a red apple, this is simply folk psychology. It's a practical way to communicate that the V4 region of our visual cortex is activating in response to light waves oscillating at 620 to 750 nanometers, which takes a lot longer to say. To speak precisely about mental phenomenon involves eliminating the metaphors of folk psychology. If we want to speak clearly and precisely, we got to get rid of the folk psychology in favor of clear descriptions of neuroscientific observations. This sort of position is sometimes referred to as eliminative materialism. And so Ryle and Churchland both reduce the mental to the physical. Ryle reduces mental terms to descriptions of behaviors, and Churchland reduces them to descriptions of neurology. But there seems to be a sense in which these responses both kind of sidestep the issue that made the Cartesian intuition compelling in the first place, right? The ghost doesn't seem quite so easily disposed of. There seems to be some sort of fundamental difference between the activation of a pattern of neurons and the experience of listening to a guitar solo. The behavioral and neurological explanations capture objective features that can be expressed in the third-person language of quantitative scientific descriptions. But there seems to be a qualitative sense of what experience feels like from the inside, from the first-person point of view as well. There is a way that the world shows up for us, what Wilfrid Sellars calls the manifest image. That seems different in an important and non-trivial way from the quantities and equations of what Sellars calls the scientific image. So plucking a guitar string creates mechanical compression waves in the air, right? Inside the Cartesian theater, there are no pressure waves or neural firings or any of that stuff. There is only the thunderous drama of a distorted guitar chord, power chord, and the sense of triumph or foreboding that it evokes. There seems to be what Joseph Levine calls an explanatory gap between the objective physics of sound and the subjective experience of music. Compression waves have existed for billions of years. Human minds and guitar riffs are relatively recent developments. For most of its long history, the universe existed as inert, unthinking matter, blindly obeying the laws of entropy. Then, for one unimaginatively brief moment, fragments of matter began thinking, questioning, and writing songs. When the brief flame of human experience flickers out, will the song remain? Or will there only be compression waves? This is the question that will motivate part 2 of the lecture, and I'll see you there.